At 84 years old, George Clinton stood once again in the spotlight. But this time, not because of his music or his colorful stage shows. It was because of a lawsuit that shook the music world to its core. The man who brought the mothership to earth, the godfather of funk, had filed a $100 million claim, saying the industry had stolen his life's work. You won't believe how deep this story went. Behind all the wild costumes, glowing lights, and booming beats, there was a story of betrayal, greed, and endless legal fights that haunted him for decades. The same man who gave the world songs like Give Up the Funk and One Nation Under a Groove was now fighting for the right to even own his own music. Let me tell you, George Clinton had lived a life as wild as his sound. He had changed the face of music in the 1970s with his bands Parliament and Funkadelic. His music was loud, free, and full of energy. But behind that freedom was a trap that few saw coming. In the early years, Clinton trusted the wrong people. Contracts were signed, papers were filed, and little by little, the rights to his songs slipped away. At the center of it all was a man named Armin Baladian, the owner of Bridgeport Music. Clinton had once believed Baladian was his friend, someone who would protect his work. But destiny took an unexpected turn. Over time, Clinton realized that Baladian had somehow gained control over almost 90% of his music catalog. This was not just about a few songs. This was about everything George Clinton had ever created. Decades of art, ideas, and legacy. The craziest part? Clinton said many of those contracts were fake, backdated, or signed without his consent. Yet, the courts refused to believe him. Case after case, judges sided with the paperwork that Baladian's team provided. What makes this story different is that Clinton wasn't only fighting a man. He was fighting a system built to protect whoever owned the documents, not the truth. The royalties from his biggest hits were going straight into someone else's pocket while he struggled to keep up with legal fees. But here's the shocking part. Those stolen songs were still making millions. Clinton's tracks had become some of the most sampled music in history. From hip-hop to pop, from Dr. Dre to Snoop Dogg to the Black Eyed Peas, everyone had borrowed pieces of his funk. His song Atomic Dog alone had shaped generations of beats. Yet, Clinton said he was seeing almost nothing in return. The same music that had built empires for others had left its creator in financial pain. To the public, George Clinton was still the larger-than-life funk lord, smiling, laughing, and landing the mothership. But behind the scenes, he was exhausted, caught in a maze of courtrooms, lawyers, and unpaid royalties. And this is where it gets interesting. Clinton claimed that Baladian wasn't acting alone. He said music publishers and record labels were also involved in the manipulation, paying royalties to the wrong people, and keeping him trapped in a legal loop. According to him, even major performance organizations like BMY gave away his money without verifying who truly owned his work. Imagine spending your entire life building something only to see it legally stolen from you while the world cheers your name. It was painful irony. The man who taught millions how to free their minds through music now found himself chained by contracts. Through all of this, Clinton tried to stay strong, but the more he fought, the more it drained him. Each lawsuit felt like a personal attack, and each legal loss took away a piece of his identity. His fans saw the funk icon, the wild performer with rainbow-colored hair. But they didn't see the man who spent years fighting just to keep his art alive. He often said the world loved his sound, but ignored his struggle. For Clinton, this wasn't just about money, it was about justice. And then, when people thought things couldn't get worse, the story took another turn, one that pulled even bigger names into the mix and made the fight over funk explode in public. But here's the shocking part. Even after all those courtroom losses and endless battles, George Clinton refused to give up. You would think a man in his 80s would slow down, but instead, he went after some of the biggest names in music. Let me tell you, this is where the story took a wild turn. In 2010, Clinton shocked everyone when he accused the world-famous group, the Black Eyed Peas, of stealing from him. Their global hit Shut Up had sampled his 1979 classic, Not Just Knee Deep. Clinton claimed that he never gave them permission to use it. The papers showed his signature approving the use, but Clinton insisted it was a forgery. The craziest part, that one forged signature was worth millions. The lawsuit quickly became one of the most talked about cases in the music industry. People couldn't believe that one of the world's biggest pop groups was now being dragged into a decades-old funk war. Clinton argued that this case wasn't just about one song. It was proof of how his entire music legacy had been mishandled. According to him, once those disputed copyrights fell into the wrong hands, anyone could use his work, forge his name, and make money while he got nothing. He believed this was the perfect example of how the system had failed artists like him. This is how the story got darker. Clinton wasn't just fighting record labels and producers anymore. He was turning against his own lawyers. After losing several cases, Clinton filed a malpractice lawsuit against one of the most powerful law firms in America, a firm once led by the legendary Johnnie Cochran Jr. Clinton accused them of making mistakes that cost him his chance to win back control of his music. For him, it felt like betrayal after betrayal. The people he trusted to protect his rights, he now believed, had helped destroy them instead. But destiny took an unexpected turn yet again. Clinton's financial troubles started to pile up. The cost of fighting so many legal battles was overwhelming. Soon, he found himself facing a $1.5 million lawsuit over unpaid legal fees. And when he couldn't pay, things got even worse. To settle the debt, he had to transfer ownership of some of his most iconic songs, including One Nation Under a Groove, to a law firm based in Seattle. Just think about that for a moment. The very song that symbolized unity, power, and freedom was no longer under his control. The symbolism was heartbreaking. What makes this story different is that George Clinton wasn't some washed-up artist who lost touch with reality. He was still performing, still inspiring, still fighting for what he believed was his. Yet, he was watching pieces of his soul being sold off in legal settlements. Each new document, each court ruling, became another wound. The same man who built his legacy on creativity was now being buried under paperwork. And let me tell you, this legal storm didn't just hurt his career. It changed how people saw him. Some began to question whether Clinton was a victim or the one causing chaos. But for George, it didn't matter what others thought. All he wanted was justice. He wanted to reclaim what was rightfully his. He once said that the industry might own his songs on paper, but it could never own his funk. But just when it seemed like the worst was behind him, the battle took a shocking new direction. Not from outsiders this time, but from the very people he once called family. This is where it gets interesting, because the next chapter of George Clinton's story didn't come from lawyers or record labels, but from the people closest to him. You won't believe how deep the cracks ran within his own circle. As the legal battles piled up, family tensions began to surface. Some of the very people he loved and trusted started questioning his decisions, his management, even his sanity. The man who once led entire bands with harmony and groove now found himself surrounded by silence, suspicion, and pain. It all began when certain family members claimed that Clinton's empire, what was left of it, was being mishandled. They accused people in his inner circle of manipulating him, taking advantage of his age, and making decisions behind his back. Clinton fired back, saying that the real problem wasn't the people around him, it was the outsiders who had divided them. He believed that years of legal chaos had poisoned his relationships, turning those closest to him into strangers. The craziest part? There were moments when Clinton didn't know who to trust anymore. Let me tell you, it wasn't just emotional damage. Financial stress was crushing him. He was drowning in court filings, paperwork, and fees. Every time he thought one battle was over, another one began. The royalties that should have been flowing in from artists sampling his music were tied up in disputes. Even the songs that made him a legend were now tangled in ownership confusion. Imagine being the father of funk, the man whose music shaped generations, and still having to beg for what's yours. But here's the shocking part. Clinton started realizing that his fight wasn't only about himself anymore. He saw it as a fight for every artist who had ever been tricked by the industry. He began speaking openly about how record labels and publishing companies use complicated contracts to steal creative ownership. He said, the system is designed so that if you don't have a law degree, you're going to lose your music. Those words hit hard. They weren't just coming from bitterness. They came from decades of watching others fall into the same trap he had once trusted. This is how destiny took another unexpected turn. Clinton began to reinvent his legacy. Instead of hiding behind the lawsuits, he started telling his story publicly on interviews, documentaries, and even from the stage. His pain became his power. Fans who once danced to his music now saw the man behind the beats, tired, scarred, but still standing. He wanted people to know the truth, that the same system celebrating him was the one that had tried to silence him. And slowly, something strange began to happen. The public started to rally around him. Younger artists, especially from the hip-hop world, began speaking up in his defense. They credited him for inspiring their entire sound and expressed outrage that he wasn't getting his fair share. It was as if the generations he had influenced were now returning the favor. Funk had come full circle. But just when things began to look hopeful again, when Clinton finally seemed to be winning back the respect and recognition he deserved, a final twist came along, one that would challenge everything he had fought for and leave fans wondering if this battle would ever truly end. But here's where the story takes its final, unexpected turn. Because just when it seemed George Clinton was finally finding peace, the past came knocking again. You won't believe how fate played its cards this time. After decades of fighting, Clinton discovered that some of the very documents that caused his downfall were still being used in new lawsuits. Even in his 80s, he was being dragged back into courtrooms over music he wrote half a century ago. The man who had built his life around creativity was still trapped in a cycle of legal drama that refused to let him go. Let me tell you, this was not just about paperwork anymore. It had become a war over legacy. Clinton wasn't chasing money. He was chasing truth. He wanted the world to know who really owned the funk, not the businessmen who filed contracts, but the artist who created the sound. The craziest part was that even as he kept fighting, new generations were discovering his music through samples, remixes, and social media trends. His voice, his beats, his energy, they refused to die, even when the legal system tried to bury them. And here's the shocking part. In 2023, reports surfaced that Clinton had filed another major lawsuit, this time accusing his old partners of forging copyright transfers to keep control over his catalog. At his age, most people would have given up long ago, but not George. He was still speaking up, still showing up to court, and still telling anyone who would listen that he'd been robbed of his life's work. He said it best himself, "I don't need sympathy. I need my songs back." That one sentence summed up his entire journey. What makes this story different is that Clinton never stopped believing in the power of his art. Even through betrayal, fake signatures, broken trust, and endless trials, he never lost his spirit. He kept performing, touring, and teaching younger artists how to protect their music. He turned his pain into purpose. On stage, under the bright lights, you could still see that same fire in his eyes, the same funk that started a revolution. His message had changed, though. It wasn't just about the music anymore. It was about ownership, freedom, and dignity. And destiny, it seems, had one last gift for him. In recent years, the public narrative started shifting in his favor. Artists began speaking out about unfair contracts. Movements were born demanding transparency in music publishing. Suddenly, Clinton's decades of struggle didn't look like madness. They looked like prophecy. He had been fighting a battle everyone else was just starting to understand. Today, George Clinton stands as more than just the godfather of funk. He's a symbol of resistance, of resilience, and of never letting the system define your worth. He proved that even when the world takes away your rights, your name, or your royalties, it can't take your soul. The mothership may have landed long ago, but the message it carried still echoes through generations. Free your mind, and the rest will follow. Because in the end, George Clinton didn't just create funk, he became it. A rhythm that could never be owned, never be silenced, and never be forgotten.